Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio, e buonasera, Lazio world. Welcome to your instant reaction pod. Consider this your stoppage time as I am here solo, once again, left hanging like Provedel with Lazio and his back line. Here to review the absolute disaster class of Bologna, Lazio. Not a ton of positivity this morning, so let's jump into this 5-0 and questions on questions on questions with very few answers. Jumping into this one where we usually do, and I think the questions start with a lot of where honestly our starting lineup came in at, and yeah, this one's gonna have me a little bit all over the place and flummox, but we'll dive right into this. Starting 11, you've got Marusic at left back due to a last minute switch. We had seen Nuno Tavares getting the nod, but after warm-ups was pulled out due to a knock. I don't know if it was preventative or if he suffered something during warm-ups, but a last-minute switch that would end up impacting this match. Romagnoli, Gila, and Lazzari as your right back. And then your typical pairing, Rovella, Guendouzi. And then you saw the change here, Vecino playing in that position slightly behind Dia with Isaacson and Zaccagni as your wingers. And very simply, it all just didn't work. And we'll talk about where blame lies. A lot of debates that I know I've had in my circles of Laziali and group chats. Going to be very curious to hear what all of our Laziali have to say about this one. But in the first 10, 15 minutes, I thought it was a Lazio side that was okay. Nothing life-changing. It wasn't an overly ambitious or dynamic team, but I thought our possession was fine. I thought we had a decent run of passes and movement. Nothing that really broke the lines or created opportunities, but I thought we looked fairly sharp. Man, and then we see a mistake, and it is within the first 15 minutes, 16 minutes. You see Lazzari a little bit asleep. Odegaard makes a really nice run. Gila doesn't track him well enough, and Odegaard gets a foot to it, stretches out nicely. Gila most certainly should have done better, and bags it, and it's immediately 1-0 Lazio, and 1-0 Bologna over Lazio, and then you see from then on a Lazio side that pretty much caved in. And yeah, I think we end up going into half down one, and it's 1-0 with all to play for. And I think the questions start to be asked, if they weren't already, with the way we kind of approached that first half in the starting lineup. But questions on the second half and the substitutions. And as we start we're currently live on YouTube, as we start getting a few more people here in the stream wanting to, ask folks to drop in their comments and how they thought this one was approached. We'll most certainly touch in this episode. Again, I'm recording alone today. So I do want to hear from the Lazio World community on feedback and their thoughts on Baroni and our approach to this. Yeah. Just kind of setting up here and trying to get as much of this posted while I'm running this live. So bear with me here. We go into halftime, down 1-0, everything to play for. And, honestly, the questions come in a lot of how we approach that second half. So again, I thought that first half, in the first 15 or so minutes was fine, not great. Not a ton of highlights there. You've got really our only opportunity in the 25th minute where, there was a hard line cross that was poked back by Bologna defender back to his own net. Opportunity for an own goal had it gone completely wrong for Bologna, but no big issues there. And then in the 29th minute, we did see a brilliant save by Provedel on Orsolini, who would play his part later on in the match. We go into halftime, and we all have questions. We have questions about how our approach was. We have questions about our starting 11, and the head scratcher for me came not just in how we approached it, and I did have issues with our starting lineup. But I think the biggest question, and I know Caleb and I had some of this discussion, was our halftime substitutions. So we come into half, and clearly we just don't have it. Clearly there's not a ton of pace in the team. Personally, I thought having Vecino in the match, particularly playing in your role that you would usually see Dia in, perhaps you would want to see Pedro from the onset in that role. I just thought we were really, really slow in our build-up, and we really weren't threatening at all. And so halftime subs, what I wanted to see was Belayan. And I thought he would have given us a little bit more energy. He's got fresh legs. You could clearly see this is a side that is struggling with their energy. And instead, we see the substitution of Pedro for Isaacson. So some question marks there. And Isaacson, who in that first half, I thought was one of our better players. Immediately we're punished. 48th minute goal, Orsolini just cuts us open. And then before I can even finish my notes, I'm trying to pull up a highlight to see kind of who was at fault, what exactly happened in that goal. Boom. Bologna scores again in the 49th minute. And we are very clearly shell-shocked in that moment and completely unable to recover. And it only gets worse from there. We see a side that really only had one player in, I think, Zaccagni, who came to play in the 57th minute, all on his own, puts his head down, beats a couple defenders, drives, gets the ball to his right foot, creates some space for himself, and it takes a really nice shot, only to be denied by the post. Extremely unlucky. And then we see a 62nd minute substitution, Chauna and Noslin for Zaccagni and Dia, which is a very clear signal that Baroni was waving the white flag and cleaning his hands of this match to go into international break, which questions on the substitutions here, because Zaccagni, with international break, our only player that has any opportunity to influence a match. Again, I maybe understand it, but Chauna and Noslin aren't going to do anything for you. And punished again, 74th minute, Castro goal. Gila just holds on to the ball too long, gets pickpocketed, and then 84th minute, after a couple substitutions, we finally see in the 78th minute Belayan for Guendouzi, and then punished 84th minute goal, 5-0 Bologna. My 3 words to describe this match, simply, Baroni deserves questioning at this point. And again, the questions that I have is, look, I thought this week I saw some tweets on Twitter questioning Baroni. I saw honestly what I deemed as utter nonsense about Baroni. I thought it was kind of crazy to be questioning, and when I say questioning, I don't mean dissecting his approach and his rotation and some of the stuff that he does. I think everybody is deserving of that. I think you should question every coach, and these are all good, healthy discussions for us to have as fans. And it's part of what we do on this podcast, and we encourage all of our supporters to chime in into our YouTube comments. And I love the discussions, but some of the stuff that I saw were more along the lines of Baroni out. And when I looked at some of that and took a step back, and again, we all know that we are an overachieving side. I think we all came into this season with low expectations. Certainly didn't think or expect for us to be in a Champions League race. Certainly didn't expect for us to be, in the final 8 of a European competition. And so when you kind of look at it holistically, it's head scratching to be claiming anything other than relative success for this season, given where we thought we would be and the start of a project. It's been a very likable Lazio side that, for the most part, has achieved a decent amount of success for what we expected. And so I thought those claims were absolutely idiotic, to be fair. But today, I find myself, most certainly not in the Baroni out. There's a lot of season, not a lot, but there's enough season left where we can still come out of this and really be proud of what we have accomplished. And again, we still have a great matchup in Europe with Bodo Glimt, a chance to see ourselves in the semifinals, still in a race for Champions League. But today, on this day, I do question Baroni, and I think he has to learn and learn quickly. And I think what we're going to see down this stretch is going to tell us whether Baroni is capable of this level. I don't think it's fair to provide an answer on that quite yet, but I don't think he has gotten the job done right now. And it's really, really poor form. It's inexcusable rotation or lack thereof. And my frustration comes in just his failure to see some of the moments and understand how to attack them. We saw that in the derby. We saw that today. And so I hear claims of this side is exhausted. And anybody who says that would be correct. This is a side that has tired legs. This is a side that has suffered injuries, that doesn't have a ton of midfield depth. And we came into this season short on midfield numbers, and we're relying a ton on Rovella and Guendouzi. And now we've got Tati injured, and yada 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 yada. Right? Okay, those are all fair claims. However, we enter a winter market and sign a couple players for the first time in many, many years. One of those players, Belayan, to serve and address a very clear need. And we don't use that player, and it seems like we are only ever going to Belayan in this instance out of pure desperation when the hand is forced. The first time we saw him, he played very, very well. He's a player that most similarly, characteristically mirrors a lot of what Rovella brings to the table. He is a player that brings a ton of energy and spark, and he is a player that plays a role that we are desperately in need of. And so, yes, we put a ton of minutes on the legs of Rovella and Guendouzi, and now that we have somebody to spell them, we aren't using them. And so you elect to then go with a player like Vecino, who very clearly is just doesn't have the pace, who slows up the game, who in a match like this offers very little, with a player like Belayan on the bench who does have some of the qualities we need. And so I find it very, very odd that Ibrahimovic has not seen any time, again, in minutes of play since his arrival. You sub off Isaacson and you go with Pedro instead of perhaps removing Vecino and slotting Pedro in behind Dia and then going with Ibrahimovic if you were desperate enough to take off Isaacson, who I didn't think should have been subbed out. I just it's hard, and I'm glad Patrick says it on YouTube. I'm tired of the constant "we don't have the players" excuse, and I couldn't agree more, because we can talk about, as we said, sure, tired legs and we didn't have the players and this and that, but we have some options, and some of this is Baroni's failure to understand certain moments. I mentioned the derby today, right? If you were hell bent on sticking with this lineup because you trust Vecino more than you do Belayan, because you trust certain players over Ibrahimovic, and you don't want to give some of these guys an opportunity, okay. But then you have to change the way that you play. You've got to go into a lower block. You've got to really be smart about how much you're pressing, and you've got to task Gila to stay back. And I think that failure to adjust how we play, that failure to rotate, to keep legs fresh, because we can't keep playing the same way and putting so much on Guendouzi and Robella, for example, and expect us to have the same energy required to play Baroni ball and not get punished. And today we were punished in the biggest way possible. And so just kind of running through some of the stats in this one, the scoreline says it all, but 52% possession for Bologna. And while that was fairly level, they did everything with the possession and we did nothing. They had a 2.18 expected goals. We had 0.47, displaying our inability to create anything. Bologna, not only with a 2.18 goals expected, but obviously far exceeding that with how clinical they were. They had 13 shots to our 7. They had 7 shots on target. We only had 2. They had 4 big chances. They missed none of them. They simply were a better side in all facets of the game, and we were so easy to defend. We had one player capable of beating anybody with no pace, with no energy, and simply seeing a season that was so fun to watch and so fun to be a part of slip away. And so, taking a live look now at the table, we are now in 6th. Bologna surpassing us, finding themselves in 4th. Juve yet to play their weekend's match, and then we're now only 2 points ahead of Roma, who sit in 7th, which would further fuel how much of a disaster this is turning out to be. Yes, we have fixture congestion. It's not going to get any easier. We've got now a run of games that we're coming off of really poor results. Besides Europa, Victoria Pleasant, it was a 1-1 draw. We drew Udinese, and it's hard to see how this is going to turn around. Oftentimes, I find international break coming at really poor times. I couldn't think this could have happened at a better time for us to get a little bit of rest and regroup. Real quick, diving into my man of the match, if we so desperately have to give one. I didn't see anybody really that performed better than Zaccagni. Again, the only player capable of creating, and it was his shot off the post that really was our only clear chance that we created, and that was entirely an individual effort. We do lack so much of our attack when Nuno isn't in. We become not even one-dimensional, because outside of Zaccagni, we really don't have too much that we create, particularly when Tati's not there either. So seeing Nuno drop out of that starting 11 really, really impacted our ability to do anything in attack. As far as Bidone, I thought there were some very clear poor performers amongst a holistically poor performing group. For me, one, Lazzari. We can't continue playing with Lazzari as forget him as a starting right back. I find it really hard for him to even be a rotation player right now, because aside from his pace, he offers very little. And I know that's harsh, and I typically try to reserve how harsh I am on players. But despite his pace, he can't do anything with it. His final product, we know what that is. He's been the same player for 4 or 5 years now with Lazio, whether that is in a wing back role, whether that's as a winger, or whether that's as a pure right back. I think we've got a very clear ceiling when our outside backs are as limited as a player like Lazzari is, and so I think that has to be something that we change. So for me, he was a very clear poor performer. Mario Gila was bad today. Mario Gila, a player too that needs to understand what he needs to do. He's got incredible qualities. His pace, his ability to recover. He's usually very good at winning balls. He's very good with possession at his feet. But oftentimes, and this is where Baroni comes in, he finds himself out of position or playing a little bit too loose with it, particularly in this stage of the season right now. He's a little bit off his game, a couple poor performances from him in a position we just simply can't have poor performers. And so that cost us today. But for me, my bidone, clear as day, is Baroni. I thought today he set this side up for failure. His substitutions were all wrong. The approach was all wrong. He didn't fix it. And we go into this international break. Again, nothing but questions, no answers. Really hard to be positive here. Sad state of affairs right now. And, it was all there for us. Again, still season to play, still an opportunity to turn this thing around. But, top four was, how often are we going to have a chance for us to walk into a top four position with Milan as poor as they've been, with Juve lacking any sort of quality and ability to play consistently, and we're not going to have these chances. What becomes so increasingly frustrating for me is we went 13 years between Champions League appearances, and we have talked about how important and critical it is for Lazio's growth to qualify for Champions League in back-to-back seasons, and how hard that has been, and how Lotito has failed to reinforce the squads when we do qualify for Champions League so that we can do so in back-to-back seasons. And here's Bologna, who has a magical run last year, qualifies for Champions League under Thiago Motta, and they lose their star players. They lose their manager to Juve. And Bologna is currently in a top four position with a chance to qualify for Champions League in back-to-back seasons. I can hear all the excuses, and Milan spends this, Roma spends this, Juve spends this. And it's not any of those clubs that are currently ahead of us in the table. It is Bologna with a chance to qualify for back-to-back Champions League and back-to-back seasons, which is so frustrating for us as a club because of our inability to do just that as a team that I think we should certainly be better than. Really, really frustrating. So, we've got, when we take a look at some of the fixtures ahead, a bit of a break with international duty. Now, Zaccagni and Rovella getting very deserved call-ups to the national team, but both players that could serve a little bit of rest. So we'll see what their minutes look like in Nations League against Germany. But back at it on Monday, March 31st against Torino. And then comes the hellacious schedule. We've got Atalanta on April 6th. We've got the quarterfinals of Europa against Bodo Glimt on April 10th. So 4 days in between those matches. 3 days later, on April 13th, we've got the derby. 4 days after that, second leg against Bodo Glimt. And then 3 days after that, Genoa. We finally get a little bit of reprieve with a week in between when we have to play Parma. But man, the last month of the season, just in Serie A, and this is if we advance, once we advance, knock on wood, if we do what we should be doing against Bodo Glimt, which there's nothing guaranteed at this point with how Lazio is playing. You're talking about more fixtures congested into a final month that sees us play Juve and then Inter, before we close it out against Lecce. But those two matches obviously are going to be tough ones for us. So I don't know. A lot of babbling from me in this one. Really, really frustrating because of how exciting this team was. I'm not out on Baroni yet, but he has very limited time to fix this before we find out. Was it all fairy tale? Was the start that we had with Baroni just a bit of magic and smoke and mirrors, or is Baroni capable of leading the side to where we believe we should be? And that is, in Champions League. And, again, I know most seasons, in every season you have to look at in a vacuum by itself, but this is a season in which Juve and Milan and Roma have been nothing but poor. Recent results be damned with Roma. They were a very poor team. And so a chance to qualify for Champions League was on the table. And I think we're failing to capitalize on it. So, regardless of what happens, you guys know this: 5 goals, 5-goal victory, 5-goal loss, sempre forza Lazio.